Welcome back to Yehoshua's Daf Yomi Shiur, where the Daf continues until the complete and clear revelation of Mashiach ben David. Today we'll be studying Tractate Chullin, page 54, starting with 54a. This is page 54a, top of the page, with the words Veshet nekuvaso b'mashu. Veshet nekuvaso b'mashu, drus b'mashu, kone b'nekuvaso b'chaisa, drus b'kamo. Basu de boy hadar pashta, ach echad ze b'mashu, my time ze hare mikla kale v'azeh. If the gullet is perforated in any amount, the animal is a treifa. As it is taught in the Mishnah in 42a, therefore, if the gullet is clawed and any amount of its flesh reddens, excuse me for a moment. All right. If the gullet is perforated in any amount, the animal is a treifa, as it's taught in the Mishnah in 42a. Therefore, if the gullet is clawed and any amount of its flesh reddens, the animal is a treifa as well. But if a perforation of the windpipe renders the animal a treifa only, where is this the size of an iser? If clawed, what amount of its flesh must redden in order to render it a treifa? After he raised the dilemma, he then resolved it. Both this and that render the animal a treifa if any amount of its flesh reddened. What is the reason for this? It is because its venom burns continuously around the circumference of the hole and widens it. Yosef Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta kamed Rav Nachman Yosef v'komar. Dehusa she'amru tzricha b'dika k'neged b'nei me'ayim. Rav Nachman about. Okay, here's one that I didn't get. I don't get why this is said, but we'll say it. He says Ha Elokim, Ha Elohim. Why? It doesn't seem necessary to me. Why do you have to do that? It seems like, in a sense, I'm not passing judgment, but I'm saying it looks like using Hashem's name for no purpose. I mean, why? You could say, how could you, or any other expression of excitement, but by Hashem? I mean, like, okay, it's a question. I would love to hear an answer if anyone has an answer. But every once in a while, you come across this when two Amoraim, usually Amoraim in the Gemara, are arguing. Yeah, I think I haven't seen it with Tanaim. Yeah, it's usually when Amoraim are arguing. And one Amora will say, by, the name of the Creator. Like, why? Why is it necessary? Okay, let's go back. Rav Nachman said, okay, the Gemara relates, Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta sat before Rav Nachman, and he was sitting and saying, and a clawed animal, about which the sages said one must be concerned, requires inspection adjacent to the intestines to see that the flesh has not reddened. And Rav Nachman said to him, by Hashem, or by the Creator, Rav would teach that it must be inspected over its entire body, from the flesh around to the hollow of that of the thigh. Couldn't he have just said, Rav? Okay, I think I made my point. My kappa, ile makappa dida, hainu keneged me'ayim, ela mikappa dimocha ad atma. The Gemara asks, what is the hollow? If we say that it is the hollow of the foreleg, meaning its shoulder, then the area between it and the thigh is the same as the area adjacent to the intestines. And Rav Nachman has said nothing new. Rather, Rav Nachman referred to the area from the hollow of the brain, meaning the skull, to the thigh. Okay? Ki Salak Rav Chia bar Yosef. Ashkachin on Ram Yochanan. Reish Lakish. The Asvi V'Ka'amri Derus Hashamru. Tzarich Abdika Keneged. B'nei Me'ayim. Amar Lahu. Again. Ha Elokim. Why? I don't even like saying it. I don't even like reading it in the Gemara, let alone say it as an actual thing. Ha Elokim. Moire ba Rav Mikaba Avialatma Amane Shlagish Manu Rav Umanu Rav Lo Yidanale. The Gemara writes that when Rav Chia bar Yosef went up from Babylon to Israel, he found that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were sitting and saying, a clawed animal about which they said one must be concerned requires inspection adjacent to the intestines. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef said to them, again, by God. Why? Why do you need to invoke the name of God for this? Why? Is there a hidden code here? I always think there's a hidden code, maybe. Rav would teach that it must be inspected from the flesh around the hollow to that of the thigh. Reish Lakish said to him, who is this Rav? And who is this Rav? Manu Rav, Umanu Rav. I do not know who he is. Amar Rav Yochanan v'lo nihira le Yoto Talmid Sheshimesh Es Rabbi Rabba V'Rabbi Chia again. I'm just going to go 86. Oh, 91, I'm sorry. 91. Okay. 91 and 6 is 97. So when it says Veha Elohim, it's 97. And when it's Ha Elohim, it's going to be 91. Okay? So Rabbi Chia bar Yosef apparently was saying, who is Rav? We don't know him. Hard to imagine that they wouldn't know him. He was very famous at the time. L'chora. But, okay, he didn't know who Rav is, or maybe he was just saying tongue-in-cheek. But anyway, Rabbi Yochanan said, do you not remember that student who served the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabbi Chia and studied under them? 97. And all those years that this student served in the yeshiva, he was held to be one of the most important students. And he was allowed to sit during study, while I held a lower status and served while standing up. And who was greater? He was greater in all things, in Torah and piety. Okay. 97. Kol oisan shonim shishimesh loisoy Talmud b'yeshiva ani shimashti b'amida u'man gavar b'chora. I can't be the first person to ask this question. Okay. Miyad pasach reish Lakish v'yomar bram zachor oso ha'ish latov she'amar shmo mipiv shmuta u'shechuta Keshera She'ef Shar Mishmuta Sheteaseh Shechuta. Immediately Reish Lakish began to speak and said, indeed, that man, Rav, is remembered for the good. As they said this halach in his name. If an animal's windpipe is dislocated from the throat, and it already has been slaughtered, and it is uncertain whether it was dislocated before or after the slaughter, the animal is kosher. As it is impossible for an animal with a dislocated windpipe to be slaughtered. A dislocated windpipe would have slipped away from the knife and therefore the animal must have been slaughtered while it was still attached. Rabbi Yochanan says this is not certain. Rather, one should bring the windpipe, make a new slit in it, and compare the two slits if they are similar. Then the first slit by the slaughtering knife was also made after the windpipe was dislocated, and the animal is a treifa. If they are different than the slaughtered preceded the dislocation of the windpipe, and the animal is kosher. Rav Nachman lo shano elo shelo tafas b'simonim, avol tafas b'simonim b'shachad efshar l'shmuta sh'teyase b'shchuta. Rav Nachman said, the sages taught that it is impossible to slaughter a dislocated windpipe only in cases where he did not grip the simanim during slaughter. But if you grip the simanim and slaughter the animal, then it is possible for an animal with a dislocated windpipe to be slaughtered, since it will not slip away from the knife. Zehaklal. The Mishnah states this is the principle. Any animal that was injured, such that an animal in a similar condition could not live for an extended period, is a treifa. The Gemara asks, what case does this principle add that was not previously mentioned? The Gemara responds, it was stated to add even 7 halachot of treifot, taught by Amoraim, and not listed in the Mishnah. These cases are enumerated on 42b. Debe Yosef Rishba Machu Bigida Nashia Dekatli Oso Asor Lekamet de Rabbi Yehuda ben Mesera Amalehu Kilo Sivan Treifos Yesh En Lecha Elama Shimanu Chachamim. The Gemara recounts the men of the house of Yosef the hunter would strike the sciatic nerve of an animal with an arrow and kill it that way. In other words, the animal would die from that wound. They came before Yehuda ben Betera to ask if an animal with an injured sciatic nerve is a treifa, which is relevant if the animal was slaughtered before it died. Yehuda ben Betera said it to them, and is it possible to add to the list of treifot? You have only what the sages counted, and the sages mentioned no such treifa. That doesn't seem right. That's like Tzar Balachayim, doesn't it? Rav Papa bar Abba Rishba Machu Bechulya V'Katli Asukam Rabbi Abba Amar Lahu Ki Leho Siva Treifot Yesh Ein Lecha Ela Ma Shemanu Chachamim. Likewise, the men of Rav Papa bar Abba, the hunter, would strike an animal in the kidney with an arrow and kill it that way. How is that possible? They came before Rabbi Abba to ask if such an animal is a treifot. Rabbi Abba said to them, and is it possible to add to the list of treifot? You have only what the sages counted. The Gemara objects, but we see that they die. Isn't this an indication that the animal is a treifa? The Gemara responds, it is learned as a tradition that in all these cases, if one were to scatter medicine on the wound, the animal would live. An animal is not considered treifa unless it cannot be healed. Doesn't make any sense. Okay. Mishnah, new Mishnah. Ve'elu ksheros bebehema nikva gargeres. O sheniz the God kama techzar. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel omer ad ki isar haitalki nifchasa hagul goiles velo inikav krum shel moach nikav alev velo lebeis chalalo nishbera shidra velo nifzak hachut shila. And these, despite their condition, are kosher in an animal. If his windpipe was perforated or cracked lengthwise, how much can the windpipe be missing and still be kosher? Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, until the perforation is the same size as the Italian Isar. If the skull was fractured but the membrane of the brain was not perforated, it is kosher. If the heart was perforated and the perforation did not reach its chamber, or if the spinal column was broken but its cord was not cut, or if the liver was removed and an olive bulk of it remained, it is kosher. Hamse subeis hakoisos shenikfu ze letoich ze nita latkol nit laklayos nita lechi etachton nit la haem shela v'charusa b'yidei shamayim hagiluda Rabbi Meir Machshir v'chachamim poislin. Additionally, it is kosher if the amasum or the reticulum was perforated into the other. If the spleen was removed, or the kidneys were removed, or if its lower jaw was removed, or if its womb was removed, or if its lungs shriveled by the hand of heaven, the animal is kosher. In the case of an animal whose hide was removed, Rabbi Meir deemed it kosher, and the rabbis deemed it treifa, and unfit for consumption. That's the Mishnah, now for the Talmud. Itmar Rabbi Yochanan Amar Elu Trevois Dafka Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Elu Ksherois Dafka. The Gemara says the Mishnah begins, and these are kosher, while the previous Mishnah begins, these are treifot. With regard to this, it was stated, Rabbi Yochanan says, it's not intended the phrase, these are treifot, specifically teaching that an animal is kosher, and in another case. The list of kosher cases here is therefore not exhaustive. The Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, the Tana intended the phrase, these are kosher, specifically teaching that an animal is a treifa in another case. The list of treifot at the beginning of the chapter is therefore not exhaustive. B'may kamifligi b'derav masna, d'amar Rav Masna, hai buka diatma d'shaf miduchtei treifa. Rabbi Yochanan Amar elu treifos dafka tana treifos v'tana zekla zehakla. The Gemara explains with regard to what case do they disagree. They disagree with regard to the statement of Rav Masna. As Rav Masna says, this head of the femur that was completely dislocated renders the animal a treifa, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the phrase, these are treifot, meant specifically the Tana taught list of treifot, and taught afterward, this is a principle, to add cases that were not stated explicitly. Okay, and we'll just continue on to 54b to finish the idea. V'chazia l'derav masna d'asya baha b'zeh haklal by taima v'damya l'netu le'tana elu treifois hani hu de treifa ha d'rav masna kshecha. And the Tana then saw that the case of Rav Masna, where the end of the thigh is dislocated, ostensibly comes under the heading of this is the principle, and one might assume that it renders the animal treifa as well. What is the reason for this? It is because a dislocated thigh is similar to the cases of removed organs that render animal treifa. Therefore, he taught the phrase, these are the treifot, at the beginning of the Mishnah to emphasize that it is only these that render an animal treifa, but in the case of Rav Masna, the animal is kosher. Okay, we'll stop here.